The
The
atmosphere
flames of
inside the
destiny
Zenith
burn
Citadel
bright.
didn't just
The
feel
flames of
heavy.
destiny burn
It felt
bright.
like
Do you
drowning in
stand?
expectations I'd spent 12 years trying to escape. I stood at the end of the line of princesses, my hands clasped behind my back, in the formal Vorshai stance, trying to make myself invisible. The Grand Hall was a cathedral of obsidian and captured starlight, its vaulted ceilings stretching so high they disappeared into shadow. Chandeliers crafted from pulsing thermal crystals cast flickering orange light that made every face in the crowd look demonic. My 11 sisters stood ahead of me, arranged by rank and perfection. Closest to the throne was Velsira, whose skin glowed like molten amber and whose diplomatic credentials could fill a data archive. Then came Thais, the master tactician who'd never lost a war game. Then Cora Cynthia, all the way down the line, each one more accomplished, more beautiful, more worthy than the last. And then there was me, Princess Kaelin, the scarred one. The warrior who'd read forbidden human poetry instead of tactical manuals. The daughter who'd chosen mercy over duty and paid for it with a jagged line carved from temple to jaw, a permanent reminder that compassion was the greatest sin a Vorshai could commit. I touched the scar reflexively, feeling the raised tissue that still carried heat 12 years after my father's blade had marked me. In Vorshai culture, scars were supposed to be badges of honor, proof that you'd survived battles that should have killed you. But this scar was different. This was a brand of shame publicly administered in front of the entire Dominion court when I was 16 years old. The human delegation stood at the far end of the hall, looking profoundly uncomfortable in their dress uniforms. I recognized the type immediately, soldiers playing diplomat warriors stuffed into formal clothes, and told to smile while the politicians decided their fates. Leading them was Captain Garrett Hawthorne, the Terran Marine, who'd been selected to choose a Vorshai bride as part of the Alliance Compact. He looked exactly like I'd expected, 30 years old maybe, broad-shouldered in that distinctly human way built for endurance rather than raw power. His face was a map of old scars, the kind you earned from actual combat rather than ceremonial duels. His eyes were blue, a color so alien to Vorshai sensibilities that several of my sisters had gasped when he'd entered the hall, and he looked absolutely terrified. Through the crowd, I heard the whispers, the human diplomats placing bets on which princess he'd choose, the hegemony delegates calculating trade advantages, the Vorshai generals who still remembered the sting of human railguns during the border conflicts, muttering about the indignity of political marriages. The human will pick Velsira, one of my sisters whispered. She's perfect for diplomatic relations. Or Thais, another replied. The Terrans respect military competence. No one mentioned my name. Why would they? I was the embarrassment at the end of the line present, only because protocol demanded all eligible daughters attend. My father had made it clear 12 years ago what he thought of my worth. The Imperial Herald's voice boomed across the hall, echoing off obsidian walls. Captain Garrett Hawthorne of Earth's United Marine Corps, step forward and choose the flame that shall bind our worlds. Garrett took a breath I could see from 50 meters away. His boots clicked sharply against the polished floor as he walked past the first candidate, Velsira, who gave him a practiced smile that promised political advancement and favorable trade agreements. He walked past Thais, whose energy field hummed with barely contained power, past Cora, past Cynthia, past all of them. He stopped in front of me. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear my own thermal core pulsing. Every eye in the grand hall fixed on us, the scarred princess and the human captain who'd apparently lost his mind. Captain Hawthorne, my father's voice rumbled from the throne, carrying a dangerous edge. Are you certain there are more suitable candidates available? Garrett didn't look at my father. He kept his blue eyes locked on mine, and I saw something in them I hadn't expected. Not pity, not calculation, something that looked almost like recognition. I'm certain, Your Majesty, Garrett said, his voice steady despite the fear I could practically taste in the air. I don't need a diplomat to tell me when the wind is changing. I need someone who can hold the line when the void starts screaming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a jagged piece of obsidian, its edges still unnaturally sharp despite obvious age. My thermal core stuttered as I recognized it. It was a fragment of a blade, my blade, the one I'd broken 12 years ago at Ember Canyon. Hurt, Garrett said, holding the fragment toward me. The world tilted. I stared at the obsidian shard, at the piece of the weapon I'd snapped with my own hands to prove to 35 terrified human Marines that I meant them no harm. The blade I'd broken in direct defiance of my father's orders. The blade whose destruction had earned me this scar. He knew. Somehow this human captain knew what I'd done that day. Do you have any idea what you're signing up for, soldier? I heard myself ask, my voice low and dangerous. The formal protocols demanded I accept gracefully, but 12 years of shame and isolation had burned away most of my capacity for graceful acceptance. Garrett's lips quirked in what might have been a smile if it wasn't so obviously terrified. I've always been drawn to impossible odds. Besides, I think we'll make one hell of a spectacle. Through the hall, I heard my father's throne groan as he gripped its arms. Felt the thermal signatures of my sisters spike with shock, and was that jealousy? Saw the hegemony delegates choking on their drinks. I could refuse. Protocol allowed it. I could tell this human captain that he'd made a terrible mistake, that the scarred daughter was not a prize worth claiming, that he should choose one of my perfect sisters and live a long, politically advantageous life. But as I looked at the obsidian shard in his hand, the piece of my broken blade that he'd apparently carried for 12 years, I realized something profound. This man hadn't chosen me despite my shame. He'd chosen me because of it. Because the scar on my face was proof that I'd already made the hardest choice a warrior could make: mercy over orders, compassion over conquest, the lives of strangers over my own advancement. I reached out and took the shard from his hand. The obsidian was warm, carrying heat it shouldn't have possessed after so many years. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt something, a resonance, a connection, as if the universe was confirming that this improbable choice was somehow exactly right. The bloodlock is accepted, I declared, raising our joined hands. My father stood from his throne, and the temperature in the hall spiked 20 degrees. Then let the ritual begin. The energy that coiled around our wrists was like being branded with frozen fire. Molten chains of light sizzled against my skin, and through some connection I didn't yet understand, I felt Garrett's agony as if it were my own. His human nervous system wasn't designed for this kind of bonding. The pain should have killed him outright. But he didn't scream. He gritted his teeth and endured, his blue eyes never leaving mine. When the light faded, a dark pulsing mark was etched into both our wrists. The union was sealed. Through the mark, I felt his heartbeat, fast, terrified, but absolutely determined. We walked down the long corridor away from the hall, the whispers following us like a swarm of angry insects. Madness, suicide, an insult to the pact. You're either very brave or very stupid, Garrett Hawthorne, I said without looking at him. Maybe both, he replied. But I'm betting my life that you're worth the risk. I stopped walking and turned to face him. The corridor was empty here, the ceremonial guards having been left behind. It was just the two of us, a scarred Vorshai princess and a human marine who'd somehow seen past 12 years of shame to recognize courage. At Ember Canyon, I said quietly, I was 16 years old. My father sent me with the 4th Legion to prove Vorshai superiority. Our orders were explicit: no survivors. 35 human Marines were trapped in a cave system, surrounded out of ammunition. They were children. Boys barely older than I was, sent to die by commanders who didn't care if they lived or fell. Garrett's throat worked as he swallowed. I was one of them. I know, I said. I remember your eyes. You were terrified, but you put yourself between the younger soldiers and the cave entrance anyway. Ready to die first if it bought them a few more seconds. You broke your blade, Garrett whispered, right in front of us. Snapped it with your bare hands and told us about the steam vents. Showed us the way out while your own forces were sweeping the caves. And my father gave me this scar the next day. I finished, touching my face. In front of the entire Dominion court. He called it my badge of cowardice. Every Vorshai who sees me knows I failed my first command. That I chose human lives over Vorshai honor. Garrett reached up slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. When I didn't, his fingers, so much softer than Vorshai skin, so vulnerably human, traced the line of my scar. To me, he said softly, this is the bravest thing I've ever seen. Something broke open in my chest. For 12 years, I'd carried this scar as proof of my fundamental wrongness, my inability to be the weapon my father wanted. And here was this human, This stranger telling me it was proof of exactly the opposite. The moment shattered as alarms screamed through the citadel. Breach in the thermal vents. A guard's voice echoed down the corridor. Void signatures detected multiple contacts. Garrett's hand dropped to his hip, searching for a weapon he wasn't allowed to carry in the ceremonial halls. He swore in 3 languages I recognized and 2 I didn't. I was already moving my instincts, overriding protocol. The ceremonial suite where we were supposed to complete the bonding ritual had weapons, ornamental ones meant for display, but better than nothing. "Stay close," I commanded, sprinting down the corridor. "Not a chance I'm letting you out of my sight," Garrett replied, matching my pace despite his human limitations. We burst into the suite just as the walls exploded inward. Void Eaters poured through the breach, oily, shifting silhouettes that seemed to drink the light from the air. I'd seen reports about these creatures during my time with the 4th Legion, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with jerky, stop-motion wrongness, their forms flickering between dimensions, as if they couldn't quite decide whether to exist. I grabbed a thermal glaive from the wall display, feeling its weight settle into my hands with familiar comfort. The blade ignited with a roar of white-hot fire. Garrett seized a basalt mace, 20 kilograms of solid volcanic rock that he swung like it weighed nothing. "On me!" I barked, falling into combat rhythm as naturally as breathing. The first Void Eater lunged. I bisected it with a single strike, thermal energy erupting in a cascade of sparks as the creature dissolved into gray ash. But there were always more. For every one I burned, 2 more crawled from the shadows. Through the brand on my wrist, I felt something new, a connection deeper than words. I knew where Garrett was without looking, felt his tactical awareness feeding into mine. When a Void Eater tried to flank me, I sensed his warning a microsecond before I saw the threat. We fought like we'd been partners for years instead of minutes. Every time I overextended a strike, Garrett was there to cover my opening. Every time his human reflexes were too slow, I burned the threat before it could touch him. But there were too many. And then I felt it, a drop in temperature so severe that frost began forming on the walls. On a planet where the ambient temperature was hot enough to melt lead, frost was impossible, unless a Void Herald had arrived. The creature emerged from the darkness like a nightmare-given form. 4 meters tall, draped in ribbons of torn space, its face a swirling vortex of white noise and stolen light. Where it moved, reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. "Kalen, run!" Garrett shouted, positioning himself between me and the Herald. "Not happening!" I snarled, raising my glaive. The Herald expanded, a wave of absolute nothingness rolling toward us. I triggered my glaive's full thermal release, channeling every degree of heat I could generate into a concentrated beam that lanced into the creature's core. The explosion was deafening. The Herald shrieked not with sound, but with psychic pressure that made my skull feel like it was splitting and recoiled. But one of its tendrils got through my guard. The touch of void matter against my armor was like being plunged into the coldest darkness imaginable. Not just physical, cold, existential cold. The sensation of being unmade at the quantum level, of having the fundamental forces that held my atoms together questioned and found wanting. I screamed. Through the brand, I felt Garrett's horror, felt him drop the mace and charge toward me, his human hands grabbing my shoulders and pulling me away from the Herald's touch. "Get back," I managed to gasp, but he wasn't listening. The Herald's tendril lashed out, catching Garrett across the chest. He flew backwards, slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the obsidian. Through our connection, I felt his ribs break, felt his lung collapse, felt his heart stutter as his body went into shock. No. The word wasn't spoken aloud. It was a command, a refusal, a declaration that the universe didn't get to take him from me when I just found him. I reached through the brand on my wrist, through the connection we'd formed during the ritual, and I pulled. Every spark of thermal energy in my core, every degree of heat I'd accumulated over 28 years of existence, I channeled through that connection and poured it into Garrett's failing body. The Herald lunged for us both, sensing weakness. I spun my glaive, moving in an arc of pure desperation, and drove it straight into the creature's vortex face. The thermal discharge was blinding. The Herald exploded into fragments of shadow that evaporated before hitting the ground. And Garrett gasped, his eyes flying open as his heart restarted. Through the brand, I felt our connection deepen. What had been a formal bonding ritual became something else entirely, a genuine fusion of consciousness, a sharing of life force so complete that I could no longer tell where my awareness ended and his began. Did we? He croaked. We survived, I said, pulling him to his feet, which for us seems to be the same thing. Now move. We need to reach the hangar before the entire citadel collapses. We ran through corridors, filling with smoke and screaming guards. The Void Eater attack had caught everyone off guard. These creatures weren't supposed to be able to penetrate citadel shields. Someone had sabotaged the thermal dampeners, or something had called them here deliberately. The magma docks were 7 levels down, accessible only through maintenance flumes that were definitely not designed for emergency evacuation. But the lifts were death traps during an attack, which meant we had one choice. The trash chutes, I said, my favorite way to travel. Garrett's laugh was slightly hysterical. At least the day's staying interesting. We dove into the maintenance system, sliding down heated flues designed to carry waste materials to the thermal processing cores. The heat was intense, even for me, easily 600 degrees. For Garrett, with his human tolerance, it should have been lethal. But through the brand, I shared my thermal resistance with him. His skin blistered and healed in real time as I fed him energy, keeping his core temperature stable, even as we descended through what was essentially a working volcano. We emerged in the docking bay covered in soot and smelling like burnt metal. Most of the ships were gone, launched in the initial panic. Only a few auxiliary craft remained. There, I pointed to a sleek vessel at the far end, the Cinder Runner, prototype scout ship, faster than anything the Imperial Guard has. Temperamental, Garrett guessed. Extremely. But I can fly anything with a reactor core and enough thrust. We sprinted across the open dock, Void Eaters dropping from the ceiling like rain. I cut through them without slowing my glaive, leaving trails of burning ash. Garrett covered our flank with a pulse carbine he'd grabbed from a dead guard, his shots precise despite having never trained with Vorshai weapons. Through the brand, I fed him targeting data. Through the brand, he shared his tactical awareness. We moved as one entity with 2 bodies. We reached the Cinder Runner and threw ourselves through the airlock. I hit the pilot's seat while Garrett sealed the hatch, and we launched without bothering with pre-flight checks. The ship tore free from its moorings, engines screaming as we shot through the docking bay doors. Behind us, a section of the Citadel's thermal core exploded, sending debris the size of buildings tumbling through the air. I banked hard, pushing the engines beyond their safety limits, and we cleared the Citadel's spire with approximately 3 meters of clearance. Only when we'd reached the upper stratosphere did I allow myself to look at Garrett. He'd collapsed in the co-pilot's seat, his skin gray, his breathing shallow. Through the brand, I felt his consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. No, I said again, this word fierce and absolute. You don't get to die now, not after everything. I left the autopilot engaged and knelt beside him, pressing my hands against his chest. Through the brand, through the connection we'd forged in fire and desperation, I searched for that core of stubborn determination I'd felt during the battle, and I found it. Buried deep beneath the shock and trauma, that fundamental human refusal to accept what the universe decreed. That icy core of will that had let him stand up at Ember Canyon even though he was terrified. That had let him choose the scarred princess even though it defied all logic. I grabbed that core and fed it everything I had. Thermal energy, life force. My own desperate need for him to survive because I'd been alone for so long and I couldn't bear the thought of being alone again. His heart stuttered, stopped, restarted. His eyes flickered open, bloodshot and dazed but focused on my face. Did we win? He rasped. Relief so intense it felt like pain flooded through me. I laughed, the sound half sob. We survived. Same thing. Nice flying, Ace, he murmured, his hand finding mine. Then his eyes closed again, but this time in natural sleep rather than death. I sat there for a long moment, holding his hand, feeling his pulse steady and strong through the brand on my wrist. Then I returned to the pilot's seat and checked our trajectory. We were headed away from the Citadel, away from my father's empire, away from everything I'd ever known. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. The Cinder Runner's cockpit was cramped even by Vorshai standards designed for single-pilot reconnaissance rather than comfortable cruising. But right now, with Garrett sleeping fitfully in the co-pilot seat and the stars streaming past the viewport, it felt like the only safe place in the galaxy. I pulled up the long-range sensors and immediately wished I hadn't. Creo 7, a mining colony in the Texas sector, population 52,000. The settlement was lighting up my tactical display like a distress beacon. Thermal signatures spiking, void eater concentrations off every chart, and hanging in high orbit like vultures, three massive hegemony cruisers with their ventral cannons charging to 87% capacity. Purge strike configuration. I'd seen this before during my time with the 4th Legion. Level 5 void breach protocols. The hegemony doctrine was explicit: contaminated sectors must be sanitized to prevent cascade infection. They weren't preparing for precision bombardment. They were preparing to glass the entire settlement, burning it down to bedrock to ensure no void contamination could spread. 52,000 people, families, children. Mining crews who'd done nothing more dangerous than extract silicates from asteroid belts, now marked for extermination because the Convergence had decided their survival wasn't worth the risk. I should have kept flying. We were fugitives now, the scarred princess and the human who'd chosen her, fleeing my father's wrath with stolen ship. We had no authority, no backup, no reason to believe we could make any difference. But through the brand on my wrist, I felt Garrett stirring, felt his consciousness surfacing from sleep, felt the exact moment when his tactical awareness engaged and he processed what I was looking at. "How many?" he asked quietly. 52,000 registered inhabitants, I replied. Majority human, maybe 8,000 Vorshai technical personnel. It's a frontier colony, low strategic value, minimal defenses. And the hegemony is going to burn them anyway. Doctrine is clear, I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. Void contamination on a settlement this size can't be contained. The resource cost of evacuation exceeds the colony's economic value. From a pure risk assessment standpoint, purging is the logical choice. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, studying the tactical display with the focused intensity I was beginning to recognize as his combat mode. "What do you see?" he asked. I looked at the display, at the thermal clusters representing mining habitats, at the distress signals that no one was answering, at the small bright signature flagged as an elementary education facility. "I see Ember Canyon," I whispered. "I see 35 faces multiplied by 1,000. I see every choice I've made for 12 years leading to this exact moment." Through the brand, I felt Garrett's resolve crystallize into something diamond hard and absolutely unyielding. "Then let's make sure this time we save all of them," he said. I turned to look at him fully. His face was still pale from the injuries he'd sustained during the Void Herald fight. His ribs were wrapped in emergency biofoam. By every reasonable standard, he was in no condition for combat operations. But his blue eyes were clear and determined, and through our connection, I felt the truth: he'd already made his choice. The only question was whether I'd make mine. "If we interfere with a hegemony purge strike," I said carefully, "we become enemies of the entire Convergence. My father will mark us for termination. Your own chain of command will disavow you. We'll be alone against everyone." "Princess," Garrett said, and somehow the nickname carried weight instead of mockery. "I spent 10 years carrying a piece of your broken blade because it was proof that somewhere in this brutal galaxy, someone thought mercy mattered more than orders. I didn't survive Ember Canyon just to watch 52,000 people burn because some committee decided their lives weren't cost-effective." He reached out his hand, finding mine. The temperature differential between us created a shimmer in the air, Vorshai heat meeting human warmth. "5 years ago, I watched an entire colony die because I followed orders instead of my instincts," he continued. "I've carried those faces every day since. I'm not doing that again. Not when we have a ship, weapons, and a chance, however small, to make a difference." Through the brand, his conviction flooded into me like molten iron. He was terrified, absolutely horrified at the prospect of death. But he was more afraid of living in a universe where 52,000 people died while he did nothing. And I realized that this was why I'd broken my blade at Ember Canyon. This was why I'd accepted the scar, endured 12 years of shame, stood at the end of that line of perfect princesses. Because somewhere in my core, I believed the same thing Garrett did. Some things were worth the fear. 15 minutes to intercept window, and I said, bringing the engines online. "The cruisers will detect us the moment we hit the ionosphere. Can this bucket handle their point defense batteries?" Garrett moved to the weapons console with practiced efficiency. The Terran retrofit packages include some interesting toys: EMP pulse mines, solar flare grenades, and this is beautiful, a transponder spoofer that can make us look like a friendly supply shuttle for about 90 seconds. 90 seconds, I repeated. We'll need at least 5 minutes to reach the planetary relay and broadcast the SOS. Then we'd better be very creative with our remaining 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Despite everything, I smiled. You're insane. I've been called worse, usually by Vorshai princesses. I engaged the quantum drive and we jumped toward Creo 7. The approach was like descending into a vision of hell. The planet's atmosphere was thick with ash from the thermal processing plants, and the void signatures were creating electromagnetic storms that made our sensors scream. Through the viewport, I could see the hegemony cruisers, 3 massive vessels positioned in perfect bombardment formation, their weapons glowing with barely contained power. Unidentified vessel, a synthesized voice crackled over the comms. This is Convergence Command. You are entering a restricted purge zone. Alter course immediately or you will be fired upon. You have 30 seconds to comply. I switched to the royal frequency, the one I technically no longer had authorization to use. My hand hesitated over the controls for just a moment. This was the last bridge left to burn. Through the brand, I felt Garrett's quiet confidence, like a hand on my back steadying me. I pressed transmit. Convergence Command, this is Princess Kaelin of the Vorshai bloodline, I said, loading every ounce of royal authority into my voice. I am executing a priority reconnaissance mission authorized by Grand Warlord Thrax. Your sensor data is corrupted by void interference. Stand down your batteries or face consequences of firing on Imperial blood. The silence lasted 4 heartbeats. I could almost hear the junior officer on the command deck frantically checking protocols, trying to figure out if they were allowed to question a princess's direct order. Princess Kaelin, the voice responded, uncertainty creeping in. Our records indicate you are currently listed as... Your records are 48 hours out of date, I interrupted, letting genuine heat creep into my voice. On their sensors, my thermal signature would be spiking like a flare. I don't have time for bureaucratic incompetence. People are dying while you check manifests. Stand. Down. Through the tactical display, I watch their targeting solutions waver. Uncertainty creating microsecond delays. They're not buying it completely, Garrett murmured. Point defense batteries still tracking us. 60 seconds before someone higher up calls your bluff. Then we better make them count, I said, pushing the engines to emergency burn. We dove into the atmosphere at speeds that made the hull temperature spike to levels that would have vaporized most ships. But Vorshai engineering was built for heat. The Cinder Runner screamed in protest but held together. Creo 7 spread out below us, and it was worse than the sensor data suggested. The mining colony was built into interconnected canyon systems using natural thermal vents for power. But now those vents were spewing void signatures like infected wounds. Settlement lights flickered as the power grid failed. And everywhere, crawling through streets, swarming over buildings, I saw void eaters moving in masses that blocked out the ground. The relay station... Garrett pointed to a structure on a basalt ridge overlooking the main settlement. If we can reach the roof, I can hardwire into the primary array. Bypass encryption broadcast on every Terran and Vorshai frequency simultaneously. Void concentration is heaviest there, I noted. They're feeding on the power core. We'll be landing in the middle of a swarm. I don't remember asking for easy, Garrett said, checking his pulse carbine's charge. I brought the Cinder Runner in fast and low, using canyon walls to break line of sight with the cruisers above. The landing wasn't gentle. We hit the relay station's reinforced roof hard enough to crack ferrocrete and deploy every emergency strut, but we were down. The airlock hissed open. Creo 7's atmosphere rushed in, smelling of sulfur and ozone, and something fundamentally wrong that made my thermal regulations spike in instinctive rejection. Atmospheric mix is 0.78 standard, I said, grabbing my thermal glaive. Your rebreather should handle it, but don't push your limits. Your cardiovascular system wasn't designed for this pressure. I'll manage, Garrett said, though I heard the wheeze already developing. How long do you need? 5 minutes for encryption, bypass 3 more to compose and transmit. 8 minutes total. 8 minutes holding a perimeter against a void swarm. Plenty of time. I once held a position for 6 hours against Vorshai heavy infantry. That was before you bonded to someone who feels every time your heart skips, I pointed out. If you die, I die, so try very hard not to die. His grin was reckless and familiar. Same to you, princess. Let's move. We emerged onto the roof into chaos made manifest. Void eaters weren't just present, they were everywhere. Dozens ranging from dog-sized skitterers to massive hulking shapes that towered 3 meters tall. Oily silhouettes that drank light from the air, and they were all turning toward us. Contact! Garrett dropped to one knee, pulse carbine spitting controlled bursts. His shots found marks with precision that shouldn't have been possible with Vorshai weapons. But through the brand, I was feeding him targeting data. Through the brand, he was sharing tactical awareness. We'd become something neither species had achieved alone, a hybrid combat system. I charged forward, glaive igniting. Where the blade touched void flesh, reality screamed. I moved through combat forms, drilled since childhood, each strike precise and devastating. A void eater lunged. I pivoted, bisecting it from shoulder to hip. Thermal discharge left after images on my retinas. Through the brand, I felt Garrett covering my blind spots, his carbine picking off creatures trying to swarm from behind. We moved like we'd been partners for years instead of hours. Kalen. His warning shot through our connection microseconds before I saw the threat. A void herald. It emerged from the communications tower's shadow, 4 meters of writhing darkness draped in ribbons of torn space. Where its face should have been only a vortex of white noise. Temperature dropped. Frost formed on Ferrocrete, impossible on a planet where ambient temperature should melt lead. Get to the terminal, I commanded, positioning myself between Garrett and the herald. I'll hold it. Not happening. Garrett, listen. I didn't take my eyes off the herald as it drifted closer. If you die here, everyone on this planet dies. Get to that terminal, now. Through the brand, I felt his anguish. His rage at being forced to choose between protecting me and saving thousands. But I also felt the moment he made the decision, that cold clarity when a soldier accepts necessary sacrifice. 5 minutes, he said. Don't you dare die in 5 minutes. I'll do my best, I replied, raising my glaive. The herald attacked. It didn't lunge or charge. It simply expanded, a wave of absolute nothing rolling toward me. I triggered my glaive's full thermal release, channeling maximum heat into a concentrated beam that lanced into the shadow's heart. The impact cracked Ferrocrete beneath my feet. The herald shrieked its soundless, psychic wail and recoiled. But it didn't die. It regrouped, splitting its form into 3 separate masses that came at me from different angles. I spun glaive, tracing burning arcs, but for every tendril, I severed 2 more sprouted. One got through. Void matter against my armor felt like being plunged into liquid nitrogen and existential despair simultaneously. Not just cold, the sensation of being unmade, of having the forces holding my atoms together questioned and rejected. I screamed. Through the brand, I felt Garrett nearly drop what he was doing to come back. But I slammed our connection, forcing a single command: finish the job. The herald pressed its advantage tendrils, wrapping around my legs and arms' throat, my internal heat draining away. Vision graying out, consciousness fragmenting. Not like this. I didn't find Garrett just to die on this forgotten rock. Then through the brand, I felt it. Garrett's determination. His terror, absolutely, he was terrified beyond reason. But channeling that fear was a core of pure human defiance that simply refused to accept the universe's verdict. You're not dying, his thought came sharp and clear. I won't let you. He split his focus part, working the terminal fingers, flying across encryption protocols, while another part deliberately opened our connection wider than ever before, feeding me his strength, his warmth, his infuriating human resilience. It was like being handed a torch in absolute darkness. I grabbed that lifeline and pulled. Thermal energy flooded back, not Vorshai heat exactly, but something different. Colder, sharper, no less fierce. The warmth of human determination, heat of a species that crawled from caves and convinced themselves they could touch stars. I channeled it into my glaive. The blade erupted with intensity I'd never achieved. White-hot fire shot through with crystalline, ice-blue veins. When I swung it, the herald didn't just dissolve. It shattered void matter fragments, scattering like broken glass before evaporating. The herald's absence left me gasping, falling to one knee. Through the brand, I felt Garrett's exhaustion mirroring mine. He'd given everything, but he was still working. 2 minutes. His voice came rough and strained. Terminal unlocked. Composing message. I forced myself up, turning toward the communications tower. Smaller void eaters still swarmed, but without the Herald's coordination, they were disorganized. I stumbled toward Garrett, cutting down anything in my path with mechanical precision. My glaive felt heavy, movement sluggish, but through the brand, I could feel him typing, see the message forming. This is Captain Garrett Hawthorne and Princess Kaylin. Creos 7 is under attack by Void Eaters. Hegemony forces are preparing an illegal purge strike on 52,000 civilians. We need immediate assistance. The colony is not lost. Repeat, we are still breathing. He hit transmit just as I reached his position. It's away, he said, face gray with exhaustion, broadcasting on every military frequency. If anyone's listening, a massive shadow tendril erupted from the communications array, smashing the terminal and showering us with sparks. The structure groaned, beginning to collapse. Time to go, I grabbed Garrett's arm, pulling toward the roof's edge. We ran. Behind us, the relay station's power core destabilized, electrical discharge cascading through the void swarm. Creatures shrieked and dissolved as the energy they fed on turned toxic. We reached the cinder runner as the station exploded. I threw Garrett through the airlock and dove after, slamming emergency seal. The hull rang like a bell as debris impacted, but Vorshai construction held. Launch, Garrett gasped. Get us out before the sky turned white. Through the viewport, I saw something that made my core temperature spike with hope so intense it hurt. Ships, dozens of them, dropping from Quantum Fold right between the hegemony cruisers and the planet. Leading the formation was a massive silver-hulled vessel, the USS Vanguard flagship of Earth's 7th Legion. Right behind it, 3 Vorshai war galleons bearing Splinter Clan insignia, bone-white hulls gleaming. For the first time in recorded history, human and Vorshai military forces stood together. Not just together, defending each other. On every frequency, a voice I recognized spoke. Colonel Ezra Brigham, Garrett's mentor. Convergence forces, this is Colonel Brigham of the Terran Defense Coalition. Stand down, weapons immediately. Colony Creos 7 is under joint Terran-Vorshai protection. Any attempt at planetary bombardment will be considered an act of war against both peoples. From the war galleons, another transmission. War Master Scylla of the Broken Chain Clan. The Splinter Clan stand with the humans. The age of purge is over. I stared at the tactical display, unable to process what I was seeing. On the display, hegemony cruisers' weapons powered down. They weren't retreating yet, but they'd blinked. The purge strike was canceled. Below on Creos, 752,000 people would see another sunrise. Through the brand, I felt Garrett's awe matching mine. We did that, he whispered. Your message brought them together. Our message, I corrected. The celebration lasted 40 seconds. Then the Vanguard's communications array lit with an incoming transmission tagged with a priority code I recognized instantly. Secure channel, the automated system announced. Origin Obsidian Throne. Authorization Grand Warlord Thrax. My blood went cold. Garrett met my eyes. Through the brand, question and answer passed simultaneously. There was no refusing. My father would send hunters if we didn't respond. Better to face him directly. Accept, I said. The hologram flickered to life, and there he was. Grand Warlord Thrax. 800 years of conquest given physical form. Armor forged from extinct species bones, plated in gold, smelted from 100 conquered worlds' wealth. Eyes glowing with intensity that made other Vorshai instinctively submit. But I was done submitting. Kaylin, he said, not daughter, not princess, just my name spoken like a curse. I saved 52,000 lives, I replied, keeping my voice level. If that's an error, I'll make it every day of my existence. You defied hegemony protocol. Thrax continued as if I hadn't spoken. Interfered with lawful purge operation. Broadcast seditious propaganda on military frequencies. And did all this while bonded to a human. The way he said human made it sound like something scraped off his boot. Garrett stepped into the hologram's viewing angle, positioning himself beside me in deliberate unity. With respect, sir, he said, and I admired the audacity of calling my father sir instead of proper Vorshai honorifics. The only seditious thing about that broadcast was telling truth. The hegemony was about to commit mass murder. We stopped it. If that makes us traitors, I'll wear the title with pride. Thrax's eyes fixed on Garrett with intensity that should have been lethal. Through the brand, I felt Garrett's fear, genuine visceral terror at being focus of a being who could order his death with a gesture. But he didn't back down. You speak of truth, human. Thrax's voice dropped dangerously. Let me share truth with you. The Convergence has maintained order for 3,000 years, prevented countless wars, famines, civilization collapses. Through discipline, hierarchy, and willingness to make hard choices, soft species cannot comprehend. Like glassing 52,000 civilians, Garrett shot back. That's not hard choice. That's cowardice dressed in tactical doctrine. The hologram flickered as Thrax's thermal signature spiked with rage. Behind him, I saw the grand audience chamber with 12 high reavers standing in alcoves like statues carved from malice. I am 800 years old, Captain Hawthorne. Thrax said, each word precisely controlled. I have seen empires rise and fall, witnessed consequences of unchecked chaos. Void Eaters aren't simple pests, they're entropy incarnate. Universe's rejection of order, they must be answered with absolute force or consume everything. Then why? I interrupted, voice cutting through his rhetoric. Are splinter clans standing with us? Why did humans cross half the sector to defend a colony they have no treaty obligation to protect? Could it be, Father, that your absolute force has created more enemies than solved problems? Thrax turned his full attention to me, and I remembered why I'd feared him so long. His gaze wasn't just angry, it was disappointed. Somehow that was worse. Kalen, he said, and now there might have been grief in his voice if Vorshai warlords were capable of such weakness. You were always brightest of my daughters, most tactically brilliant, strategically creative. I had such hopes. You had hopes for a weapon, I replied, not a daughter. I gave you 4th Legion command when you were 16, he continued, recounting a grievance nursed for years. Youngest officer in Dominion history, I sent you to Ember Canyon to prove what Vorshai discipline could accomplish. Instead, you betrayed me, broke your blade, let enemy combatants escape. They were children, I said, voice shaking despite efforts to control it. Terrified boys dropped into a meat grinder by commanders who didn't care if they lived or died. You wanted me to execute them like target practice. I wanted you to understand mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. Thrax's thermal signature flared so hot the hologram distorted. Every enemy you spare returns to kill your own people. Every time you choose compassion over duty, you put the entire Dominion at risk. Then maybe the Dominion deserves to be at risk. The words erupted before I could stop them, 12 years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. Maybe an empire built on fear and slaughter isn't worth preserving. You carved this scar to mark me coward, but it's the bravest thing I've ever done, and it led me to the only person in this galaxy who sees it the same way. I grabbed Garrett's hand, feeling his warmth through the brand, anchoring myself in the connection my father could never understand. You asked why I read forbidden texts, I continued, voice steadier, why I studied human philosophy and Terran poetry instead of tactical manuals. Because I wanted to know if there was another way. If somewhere in the universe, there was a species that figured out how to be strong without being cruel, brave without being brutal. I looked at Garrett, seeing in his scarred face and tired eyes the answer I'd searched for since 16. And I found it, I said, in a man so terrified at Ember Canyon he should have frozen with fear, but who fought anyway because his friends needed him. In a soldier scared every day of his career who showed up for every deployment because courage isn't absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Thrax stared for a long moment. Behind him, high reavers shifted uncomfortably, thermal signatures fluctuating. You have been contaminated, Thrax finally said, voice cold and final. The human has infected you with his weakness, sentimentality, pathetic need for emotional connection. The Council has reviewed your actions. The verdict is unanimous. He raised one massive hand, and a holographic document materialized, a formal declaration of exile, the legal instrument stripping me of every right and privilege I'd been born with. Princess Kalen of the Vorshai bloodline, Thrax intoned in formal Dominion law cadences, you are hereby stripped of rank, title, and claim to royal house. Your bond to human Garrett Hawthorne is declared void under Convergence statute. You will surrender to Dominion custody within 48 hours for de-integration and neural reconditioning. He turned to Garrett. As for you, Captain, you will be returned to Terran custody for court-martial and imprisonment. Your memories of Vorshai technology and classified Dominion information will be extracted and erased. What remains will be sent to Earth as warning of what happens when humans overstep boundaries. The hologram started fading, but I spoke before it cut out. Father, I said. He paused. Do you remember what you told me when I was 8? When I asked why we fought wars instead of seeking peace? He didn't respond, but didn't disconnect. You said fire does not negotiate with dark. It burns until one side or the other is consumed. I felt the mark on my wrist pulse with warmth. But you were wrong. Fire can be more than weapon. It can be hearth. Warmth in cold. A beacon bringing different people together instead of a torch burning them apart. I raised my wrist, showing the mark glowing with white light threaded through blue Vorshai thermal energy and human bioelectric current, merged into something neither species achieved alone. This bond isn't contamination, I said. It's evolution. You can declare it void with legal documents, but you can't make it stop being real. Garrett and I touched the essence of what holds the universe together. Shared minds pain hope. Try to sever that with neural inhibitors, and all you'll do is kill us both. Thrax was silent for a long moment. Then in a voice carrying 8 centuries of absolute authority, then I will kill you both. The hologram vanished. Garrett exhaled a breath apparently held for the last minute. Through the brand, I felt his heart hammering, adrenaline flooding his system. Well, he said, voice only slightly unsteady. That went about as well as expected. He's going to hunt us, I said, mind racing through tactical scenarios. Entire Dominion military plus any hegemony forces loyal to Convergence. We'll be most wanted fugitives in 12 sectors. Sounds right. Garrett moved to navigation, pulling up star charts. Where do we run? Terran systems won't harbor us, not with your father threatening war. Splinter clans might offer asylum, but they're not strong enough to withstand full Dominion assault. I looked at the nav display at familiar patterns of trade routes in colony clusters. Then I looked past them to the map's edge where data became sparse and warnings multiplied. We don't run, I said, making the decision as words left my mouth. We go on offense. Garrett followed my gaze and went very still. The abyss front, he said. Kalen, that's suicide. Gravitational constants fluctuating 40%. Void Eater concentration off every chart. Nobody who goes there comes back. Nobody goes there to come back, I corrected. They go there to die fighting. But we're not going to die. We're going to find out what my father is desperate to hide. I pulled up intelligence files from the Splinter Clan transmission. Buried in tactical data about Creo 7 was something else. Sensor readings from deep space monitoring stations, anomalous energy signatures, and a phrase appearing in encrypted Dominion communications. Origin pylon activation sequence initiated. My father activated something. I said, piecing it together, something at the abyss front. Void Eaters aren't randomly swarming, they're being called. Whatever's calling them connects to Dominion precursor technology. Garrett leaned over the display, tactical mind engaging. Through the brand, I felt his thought process assembling disparate information into coherent patterns. Convergence always claimed Void Eaters were natural phenomenon, he said slowly. Entropy made manifest chaos incarnate. But if they can be called, horror dawned in his eyes. If they can be called, they can be controlled or directed. My father isn't trying to protect the galaxy from Void Eaters, I finished. He's trying to weaponize them. The implications crashed over us like ice water. If the Dominion could summon and direct Void Eater swarms, they could sterilize entire sectors without risking a single Vorshai life. Purge any colony, any species, any threat to their authority by simply calling the darkness. Anyone who opposed them would be painted as defending chaos against order. We have to shut it down, Garrett said. Whatever this origin pylon is, wherever it is, we destroy it before your father weaponizes it. We don't even know if it can be destroyed, I pointed out. The abyss front is called Graveyard of Stars for reason. Precursor technology there predates every current civilization by millennia. We'd be 2 people in a stolen scout ship assaulting a fortification probably guarded by every void horror in the sector. So a Tuesday, Garrett said with that reckless grin I was beginning to recognize as severe psychological damage masquerading as courage. Despite everything, exhaustion, fear, certainty, we were flying toward death and laughed. You really are insane, I said. I prefer operationally flexible, he replied. Besides, didn't you just give your father a whole speech about how courage is acting despite fear? Time to put our energy where our thermal vents are, princess. I pulled up navigation coordinates for the Abyss front. The computer immediately flagged them with 15 warning protocols ranging from OI, extreme hazard, to navigation impossible, to, are you sure this isn't a typo? If we do this, I said, we're committing to a path with no return. Even if we survive the Abyss, even if we somehow destroy the pylon, we'll still be fugitives. We'll never be able to go home. Garrett was quiet, his hand resting on navigation controls. Through the brand, I felt him considering options, weighing the life he'd had, structure, certainty, chain of command, telling him what to do against unknown territory of being truly terrifyingly free. Home is where you make it, he finally said, and I'd rather make it with you in the Abyss than without you anywhere else. I reached out, covering his hand with mine. Temperature differential between us created a shimmer in the air, Vorshai heat and human warmth, meeting in the space between our palms. Coordinates locked, I said. Quantum fold in 3 minutes. Let's find out what nightmares my father keeps in the dark. As the Cinder Runner's fold drive began charging, I looked out the viewport one last time at Creo 7. Down there, 52,000 people were going about their lives, unaware how close they'd come to annihilation. Unaware that a princess they'd never met and a marine they'd never heard of had just declared war on the galaxy's most powerful military force to save them. I wondered if any would remember us when this was over. I wondered if there would be anyone left to remember. The fold drive hit full charge and reality twisted. We jumped into the Abyss. The Cinder Runner's cockpit smelled like scorched metal and recycled air and an undertone of ozone that made my thermal core pulse uncomfortably. I sat in the pilot seat watching the nav display with growing certainty that we'd made either the bravest or stupidest decision of our lives. The sensor readings from Creo 7 were deteriorating by the minute, thermal signatures spiking in irregular patterns, void signatures multiplying like cancer cells, metastasizing through healthy tissue, and those 3 hegemony cruisers still hanging in high orbit like patient predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Garrett stood behind me, one hand braced against the bulkhead as the ship shuddered through a debris field. Through the Cortex bridge, I'd started thinking of our connection that way. A bridge between fire and ice. I felt his presence like a second heartbeat. Steady, determined, and carrying an undercurrent of fear he'd probably deny if I mentioned it. Talk to me, Kalen. He said that particular quality of force calm Marines used when terrified, but too professional to admit it. What are we looking at? I pulled up the tactical overlay, fingers dancing across haptic controls with the muscle memory of years spent in 4th Legion command centers. The holographic display painted a picture that made my internal temperature drop several degrees. 3 Hegemony Archon-class cruisers, I said, voice flat despite my racing mind. Ventral cannons charged to 94% capacity. That's Purge Strike configuration, Garrett. They're not positioning for precision bombardment. They're preparing to glass the entire settlement. Through the bridge, I felt his spike of cold fury. It tasted like winter wind across desolate battlefields. 52,000 people, he said quietly. Last census registered 52,000 inhabitants. I confirmed, zooming in on the settlement cluster. Majority human dirt diggers and silicate harvesters. Maybe 8,000 Vorshai technical personnel. Families, Garrett. There are children down there. I turned to look at him. His jaw was set in that line I was learning to recognize, the one that meant he'd already made a decision and no amount of logic or self-preservation would change his mind. The hegemony doctrine is explicit. I continued, hating every word. Level 5 void breach on frontier colony. Infected sector must be sanitized to prevent cascade contamination. They don't see people. They see a biological hazard requiring cauterization. And what do you see? Garrett asked, stepping closer. Heat differential between us created shimmer in the air. I looked back at tactical display, at thermal clusters representing mining habitats, at communications relays still broadcasting distress signals no one answered, at the small bright signature flagged as an elementary education facility. I see Ember Canyon, I whispered. 35 faces I couldn't save multiplied by 1,000. Every choice I've made for 12 years leading to this exact moment. Garrett's hand found my shoulder warm even through armor plating. Through the bridge, his resolve flooded into me like molten iron. Then let's make sure this time we save all of them. I allowed myself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what we were about to do. We were already traitors for escaping my father's flagship, but this interfering with hegemony purge strike, this would make us enemies of the entire convergence. No more politics, no more negotiations. Just a hunt ending with our heads on pikes or atoms scattered across the void. If we do this, I said, turning to face him fully, there's no going back. My father will mark woe for termination. Terran High Command will disavow you. We'll be alone against the entire galaxy. Garrett's blue eyes met mine, and I saw the same terrified determination I'd seen 12 years ago in a cave full of dying Marines. Princess, he said, and the nickname somehow carried genuine respect. I've been scared my whole life. Scared when I joined the Corps. Scared at Ember Canyon. I'm scared right now. My hands are shaking so hard I can barely hold a rifle. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you have to be more determined than the thing trying to kill you. He stepped into my personal space close enough I could feel the electromagnetic field his human nervous system generated. You saved me when every tactical doctrine said I should die, he continued. You were 16 years old and you looked at 35 doomed Marines and decided mercy mattered more than orders. That courage doesn't come from not being afraid. It comes from being absolutely terrified and choosing right thing anyway. Through the bridge, I felt something shift between us. Not just shared pain or mutual survival deeper. Recognition that we were both people who'd spent entire lives being afraid, and we'd finally found someone who understood fear didn't make you weak. It made you aware of what you were risking. 15 minutes to Creo 7 orbit, I said, pulling up approach vectors. Cruisers will detect us the moment we hit ionosphere. Can this bucket get us past their point defense batteries? Garrett moved to weapons console, fingers surprisingly deft, activating systems I didn't know the Cinder Runner possessed. Terran retrofit packages include fun toys, he said, grim smile touching his scarred face. Solar flare grenades, EMP pulse mines, and this is beautiful hot wire override for their IFF transponders. If I can get close enough to their sensor grid, I can make them think we're friendly resupply shuttle for about 90 seconds. 90 seconds, I repeated. We'll need at least 5 minutes to reach Planetary Relay Station and broadcast SOS. Then we'll be very creative with remaining 4:30. Despite everything, I laughed, short, sharp sound that surprised both of us. You're insane, I said. I've been called worse, usually by Vorshai princesses. The approach to Creo 7 felt like descending into hell's mouth. Planet's atmosphere was thick with ash from thermal processing plants, and void signatures created electromagnetic distortions, making our sensors scream false positives. Through viewport, I could see pale blue glow of hegemony cruisers charging weapons, 3 malevolent stars hanging in darkness. Unidentified vessel, cold synthesized voice crackled over comms. This is Convergence Command. You are entering restricted purge zone. Alter course immediately or you will be fired upon. You have 30 seconds to comply. I reached for transmitter, switching to royal frequency I technically no longer had authorization to use. My hand hesitated over controls for just a moment. This was the last bridge I could burn. Through the bridge, I felt Garrett's quiet confidence like a hand on my back steadying. I pressed transmit. Convergence Command, this is Princess Kaylin of Vorshai bloodline, I said, putting every ounce of royal authority into my voice. I am currently executing priority reconnaissance mission authorized by High Warlord Thrax himself. Stand down your batteries or face wrath of Iron Pact. Is that perfectly clear? Silence lasted 4 heartbeats. I could almost hear a junior officer frantically checking protocols, trying to figure out if they were allowed to question a princess's direct order. Princess Kaylin, voice finally responded, uncertainty creeping in. Our records indicate you are currently listed as... Your records are 48 hours out of date, I interrupted, letting heat creep into my voice. Literally. On their sensors, my thermal signature would be spiking like a flare. I don't have time for bureaucratic incompetence. People are dying while you check manifests. Stand down. Through tactical display, I watched cruisers targeting solutions waver, uncertainty creating microsecond delays in firing sequences. They're not buying it completely, Garrett murmured, eyes on weapons board. Point defense batteries still tracking us. Maybe 60 seconds before someone higher up calls your bluff. Then we'd better make those 60 seconds count, I said, pushing Cinder Runner's engines to maximum burn. We dove. Atmospheric entry was violent enough to rattle my teeth and send warning klaxons screaming through cockpit. Hull temperature spiked to levels that would have liquefied human spacecraft, but Vorshai engineering was built for heat. Still, I felt every degree through armor, through skin, through connection to Garrett, whose human fragility made every jolt feel twice as dangerous. Hang on, I gritted out, banking hard to avoid debris cloud sensors only detected 2 seconds before impact. Garrett's response was low string of profanity in 3 different languages, which I was learning to recognize as his stress response. Through bridge, his fear tasted like copper and adrenaline, but beneath it was that core of ice refusing to break. We cleared the cloud layer and Creo 7 spread out below. Worse than sensor data suggested, mining colony built into interconnected canyon systems, taking advantage of natural thermal vents for power generation. But now those vents spewed void signatures like infected wounds. Settlement lights flickered irregularly as power grids struggled against electromagnetic interference. And everywhere, I saw oily, wrong shapes of void eaters swarming through streets, like locusts made of living shadow. The relay station, Garrett pointed to structure perched on basalt ridge overlooking main settlement. If we can reach roof, I can hardwire into primary communications array, bypass encryption broadcast on every Terran and Vorshai military frequency simultaneously. Void concentration is heaviest there, I noted, pulling up enhanced thermal imaging. They're feeding on relay's power core. We'll be landing in middle of swarm. I don't remember asking for easy way, Garrett said, checking pulse carbine charge. I brought Cinder Runner in fast and low using canyon walls to break line of sight with cruisers above. Landing wasn't graceful. We hit relay station's reinforced roof hard enough to deploy emergency struts and leave crater and ferrocrete, but we were down. Airlock hissed open and Creo 7's atmosphere rushed in. Smelled like sulfur and ozone and something wrong that made my thermal regulation spike in instinctive rejection. Through bridge, I felt Garrett's human lungs struggling with thin mineral-heavy air. Atmospheric mix is 78% standard, I said, grabbing thermal glaive from weapons locker. Your rebreather should handle it, but don't push limits. Your cardiovascular system wasn't designed for this pressure. I'll manage, he said, though I heard wheeze already developing. How long do you need me to hold perimeter? 5 minutes for encryption bypass, maybe 3 more to compose and transmit. 8 minutes total. 8 minutes, Garrett repeated, sliding fresh power cell into carbine. Weapon hummed to life, casting pale blue light across his face. Plenty of time. I once held position for 6 hours against Vorshai Heavy Squad. That was before you bonded to someone who feels every time your heart skips, I pointed out. If you die, I die, so please try very hard not to die. He flashed that reckless grin, becoming dangerously familiar. Same to you, Princess. Let's move. We emerged onto roof into scene from Nightmare. Void eaters weren't just present, they were everywhere. Dozens ranging from small, skittering things dog-sized to massive hulking shapes towering 3 meters tall. They didn't have eyes or mouths in conventional sense, just shifting oily silhouettes that bled light out of air. And they were all turning toward us. Contact, Garrett barked, dropping to one knee and opening fire. His carbine spat pulses of concentrated energy, each shot finding mark with precision of someone who'd spent years learning to make every bullet count. Void eaters shrieked not with sound, but psychic pressure, making my thermal core shudder and dissolved into clouds of foul-smelling gray ash. But for everyone he killed, 2 more seemed to crawl from shadows. I charged forward, glaive igniting with white-hot thermal energy. Blades sang through air, and where it touched, void flesh reality itself seemed to scream. I moved through forms drilled since childhood. Thrust, parry, spin, strike. Void Eater lunged at my flank. I pivoted, bringing glaive around an arc, bisecting it from shoulder to hip. Thermal discharge was intense enough to leave after images on retinas. Through bridge, I felt Garrett covering my 6 carbine, picking off smaller creatures, trying to swarm from behind. We moved with practiced rhythm that should have been impossible for 2 people who'd known each other less than 4 hours. Bridge was the reason. like having second set of eyes in back of my head. Every time Shadow Scum tried to check my six, I felt flare of warning from him. Every time she overextended strike, I was there to shove her back into defensive stance. It was shared agony, though. Every time armor took hit from Shadow Tendril, cold shock of pain raced up my spine. Every time lungs burned from thinning air, she felt suffocating pressure in own throat. We hit stairwell descending into guts of relay station. Transition from gilded halls of nobles to raw industrial reality was jarring. Here, walls were unpolished stone, dripping with condensation from thermal exchange pipes. Light was flickering sickly red. "Kalen," Garrett said, voice dropping, as we paused behind heavy blast door to catch breath. He looked at me, glowing eyes searching my face. "Back in hall, you showed high reaver fragment piece of Vorshai blade." I looked down. I was still clutching mace, but thumb was subconsciously rubbing pocket where shard sat. Heart hammered, frantic rhythm against ribs. Not from fight, but from weight of secret I'd been carrying for decade. 10 years, I said, voice barely whisper over distant hum of void eaters. Ember Canyon. My unit was 3rd Recon. We were supposed to be Vanguard for Terran landing, but got dropped into Meat Grinder. Vorshai 4th Legion had us pinned against Magma Falls. Out of ammo, out of luck, just waiting for final sweep. Garrett stiffened, hand tightening on glaive. I felt pulse spiking through bridge. Wave of ancient guilt rolled off him, cold and sharp. 4th Legion was commanded by my father, I said softly. Order was to leave no survivors. It was meant to be statement to Earth. I know, Garrett said. He pulled obsidian fragment from pocket. In dim light, jagged edges looked like frozen lightning bolt. We were huddled in cave listening to screams of guys who didn't get inside in time. Then shadows moved. Vorshai officer stepped in. We thought it was over. He looked me dead in eye. But she didn't raise a weapon. She looked at us. 35 terrified humans barely old enough to shave. And she threw blade into stone floor, snapped it with own hand, and told us to run through steam vents while sensors were being jammed. I was wearing helmet, but you saw a mark on my gauntlet, I said. Saw way I moved like carrying weight of whole planet on shoulders. Silence in stairwell was heavy enough to crush bone. Through bridge, I felt his walls crumbling. Fierce, untouchable marine replaced by man, absolutely terrified not of monsters outside, but of being seen. You knew, I hissed, voice trembling. All this time, you didn't pick me because of noble impulse or strategic hunch. You picked me because you had leverage. Leverage, Garrett laughed, bitter, dry sound. Kalen, if I wanted leverage, I would have sold that story to Hegemony years ago. I'd be living on beach on Earth Prime, sipping something blue. I didn't pick you for leverage. I picked you because I've spent 10 years wondering why fiercest warrior in galaxy decided to be merciful, when whole world told her to be monster. He stepped closer, heat radiating from skin making sweat on my brow sizzle. I was scared to death 10 years ago, and I'm scared to death right now, he continued. But only thing that makes sense in this whole cluster of a galaxy is that you chose to be better than what they made you. I'm just trying to return favor. I stared at shard in his palm. Slowly, I reached out, fingers brushing against his. Jolt of pure, unadulterated emotion surged through bridge. Mixture of relief, fear, and dawning, fragile hope that felt like spark and vacuum. High Reaver would have my head if he knew, I whispered. He gave me scar because I failed to deliver those 35 heads to his throne. Called it my badge of cowardice. From where I'm standing, Garrett said, tucking shard back into pocket, it looks like badge of courage. And I've always had thing for brave ones. Before I could respond, thunderous crash shook door behind us. Metal groaned, buckling inward as massive oily claw tore through reinforced steel like parchment. Time to go, Kalen, Garrett said, snapping back into soldier mode. Talk later. Survive now. Stay on my 6. I didn't argue. I stepped up beside him, glaive igniting with roar of renewed intensity. No, Garrett, I said. We moved together. As door disintegrated into swarm of devouring shadows, I realized for first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to stay alive. I was fighting for someone who'd already saved me once. And I'd be damned if I let Dark take him now. The relay station's primary control room was wreck. Monitors smashed, oily film covering every surface. In center cluster of void eaters coiled around primary data hub forms, pulsing with rhythmic, sickly light. They're draining signal, Garrett said, raising carbine. Kalen, I need you to draw them off. Can't hack system if I'm dodging shadow tentacles. Consider it done, I said. I didn't just attack. I became whirlwind, leapt into center of cluster glaive carving path of white-hot destruction. Void Eaters shrieked that sound, making ears bleed, and surged toward me, away from console. Garrett dove for terminal fingers flying across keypad. Interface was alien mixture of Vorshai haptics and human code. But he'd spent years in recon breaking into places he didn't belong. Come on, you piece of junk, he hissed, sweat stinging eyes. Talk to me. Give me uplink. Through bridge, I felt him taking hits. Shadow's relentless cold touch draining internal heat. I felt sharp, icy pain in shoulder, then another in thigh. He was shielding me, taking brunt of attack so I could focus. Garrett, hurry, my voice strained to whisper in his mind. Almost there. He bypassed final firewall. Screen flickered to life, showing green uplink established icon. He didn't hesitate. Broadcast wideband SOS on every Terran and Vorshai frequency tagged with own command codes and my royal signature. This is Captain Garrett Hawthorne and Princess Kalen, he roared into audio pick. Krios 7 is under attack by Void Eaters. Hegemony forces preparing illegal purge strike on civilian population. We need immediate assistance. Colony is not lost. Repeat, we are still breathing. He hit send just as massive shadow limbs smashed into console, showering him with sparks. Terminal went dark, but data burst was already clear of atmosphere. Kalen, we're out of time, he yelled, turning to find me. I was standing in center of pile of gray ash armor, cracked breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. Looked like goddess of war who'd run out of miracles. Did it get through? I asked, leaning heavily on Glaive. Yeah, it got through. Now we just have to hope someone's listening. We scrambled back to Cinder Runner as sky began turning brilliant, terrifying white. Hegemony cruisers were firing, but they weren't firing at Colony. Massive silver-hulled ship had dropped out of warp directly between cruisers and planet. USS Vanguard flagship of Earth's 7th Legion. Right behind it, 3 Vorshai war galleons from Splinter Clans decloaking. Well, look at that, Garrett whispered, watching sky erupt in display of orbital fireworks. People actually listened. I leaned against him, heat slowly returning as ship's life support kicked in. They didn't just listen, Garrett. They chose. For first time in 1,000 years, they chose life over logic. Yeah, he said, looking at mark on our wrists. But I have feeling High Reaver isn't going to be joining celebration. No, I said, eyes darkening. My father doesn't believe in choices. He believes in orders. And we just broke most important one. As we lifted off, leaving battle for Krios 7 behind, I felt first real weight of path we'd taken. We'd saved 52,000 people, but we'd lost our worlds. We were 2 soldiers without army prince and princess of kingdom about to hunt us to ends of galaxy. But as Garrett took my hand, skin warm and steady, I knew I'd do it all over again. Courage wasn't about not being afraid of High Reaver or Void Eaters. It was about realizing some things were worth fear. Interior of Obsidian Throne, my father's flagship was Tomb of Silence, an ancient, unyielding power. Walls lined with skulls of 100 conquered species, empty sockets, staring with judgment, heavier than ship's artificial gravity. Beside me, Garrett walked with limp jaw set in line of determination. He'd refused wheelchair, refused human-grade sedatives medics offered. He wanted to face my father on his feet. Garrett, I whispered, voice barely audible through bridge. If he offers way out, if he says you can return to Earth, if you renounce, Mun, take it. He didn't look at me. Princess, you've got to stop trying to save me. It's getting embarrassing. We're in this together, whole 9 yards, all way to finish line. Remember, the finish line might be executioner's block, I warned. Then I'll make sure my tie is straight, he grunted. We entered Grand Audience Chamber. My father, Grand Warlord Thrax, sat atop dais of jagged crystal. Didn't look like father, looked like avatar of iron, packed itself cold, ancient, utterly devoid of mercy. Standing around him were 12 High Reavers of council eyes glowing with mixture of disgust and predatory curiosity. Kalen, my father began, voice low, resonant thrum, making air vibrate. You were given simple tasks, secure alliance through symbolic Union B bridge for our influence into Terran systems. Instead, you have become virus. I saved 52,000 lives, Father, I said, stepping forward. I didn't bow. I'd outgrown need for his approval in Ash of Kreos 7. I secured alliance that actually matters. One built on mutual survival, not just trade routes and mineral rights. Thrax rose from throne, nearly head taller than me, armor, radiating heat like physical weight. He ignored me and turned gaze to Garrett. And you, human Captain Hawthorne, you have contaminated my daughter with your reckless sentimentality, taught her that whims of few outweigh stability of hegemony. You are chaotic element in system requiring order. Order is just fancy word for doing what you're told, Garrett said, voice echoing through chamber. Back on Earth, we have saying, system that doesn't bend breaks. You're so busy trying to keep Galaxy in neat little box that you're letting shadows eat corners off. One of High Reaver's hiss sound of pure venom. You dare speak of void to Grand Exarch. We have contained darkness for centuries while your kind was still throwing stones at each other. Yeah, and how's that working out for you? Garrett shot back, gesturing toward tactical maps flickering on walls. Citadel is gone. Kreos 7 nearly burned. Void Eaters aren't containment problem anymore. They're extinction event. Only reason we survived Elysia is because we stopped acting like separate species and started acting like we actually give damn about each other. Thrax stepped down from Deus' boots, clicking with slow, deliberate rhythm, stopped inches from Garrett glowing eyes boring into human soul. You think your love is shield, Captain. You think this bond makes you special. It is biological fluke resonance of neural frequencies that we can dampen with single keystroke. He raised a hand and team of Vorshai technicians emerged from shadows carrying portable neural inhibitor device designed to sever Cortex Bridge. No! I shouted, reaching for Glaive, but guards were on me, instantly pinning arms to sides. Kalen, stand down. Garrett yelled, struggling against two massive warriors who'd grabbed him. Union is dissolved, Thrax declared. Kalen shall be stripped of rank and title. She will spend remainder of cycles in subterranean pens of Elysia reflecting on failure. As for human, he will be de-integrated. His memories of our technology erased body returned to Earth as warning of what happens when soft clans overstep bounds. You can't do that, I screamed, Bridge screaming with me. I felt Garrett's terror, not for himself but for me. Felt cold clinical void of inhibitors beginning to spin up. I am iron-packed, my father said softly. I do what is necessary for fire to continue. Inhibitors pulsed. Wave of agonizing static tore through my mind. Jagged wall of white noise began shredding connection to Garrett. Felt like soul being ripped in half. I saw his face through fog of gray pain. Saw him falling to knees as own mind was assaulted by severance. Garrett, I screamed in silence of our shared thoughts. Stay with me. Don't let him. His voice came back faint, flickering like dying candle. Don't let him take it. Maximum output, Thrax commanded. Pain reached crescendo. I felt memories of fight in relay station, warmth of his hand in cockpit, look in eyes when he told me I was brave. All being dissolved, washed away by tide of artificial cold. But then something happened. Garrett didn't scream, didn't collapse into vegetative state. He looked up at my father, face twisted in mask of pure, unadulterated human spite. Is that all you've got? He rasped, blood pouring from nose. Through Bridge, I felt what he was doing. He wasn't fighting inhibitor. He was embracing pain, using agony of severance as Bridge itself, funneling entire identity, stubbornness, all fear, all love, into very static, trying to kill us. He was being Bridge. Inhibitor-grown power cells beginning to glow, dangerous pulsating red. Vorshai technicians scrambled back as sparks erupted from device. He's overloading feedback loop, one shouted. His neural output is 300% above safety limits. He's going to fry both their brains. Let him try, Thrax growled, though I saw a flicker of something new in eyes. Uncertainty. Garrett's eyes were entirely white now, glowing with intensity rivaling Vorshai's. He reached out, hand finding mine through grasp of guards. Moment we touched, static transformed. Wasn't pain anymore. Was roar. Defiant, thunderous symphony of two souls refusing to be silenced. Neural inhibitor exploded. Shockwave threw everyone back. Grand audience chamber plunging into darkness as primary power grid failed. In chaos, I felt Garrett's grip tighten. "Bug out," he wheezed. I didn't wait. Used confusion to sweep legs of guards holding me. Warrior instincts taking over. Grabbed Garrett's slinging arm over shoulder and lunged for service hatch I knew was hidden behind throne. "They'll be on us in 30 seconds, I panted, half carrying him through narrow, dark crawl space. 30 seconds is lifetime, he mumbled, head lolling. We reached auxiliary hangar bay, small secondary dock used for maintenance shuttles. Unguarded, crew having rushed to main levels to investigate explosion. I shoved Garrett into smallest, fastest scout ship I could find, needle-thin vessel designed for high-speed courier runs. "Kalen," he groaned, eyes finally returning to normal blue. "Your father, he's not going to let this go." "I know," I said, slamming airlock shut, "but we've already committed greatest sin of all, Garrett." "What's that?" "We proved him wrong," I said, sitting in pilot seat. "We proved Bond isn't fluke. It's choice, and it's choice he can't control." I punched ignition. Scout ship tore out of Obsidian Throne's side, tiny speck of defiance against gargantuan scale of flagship. As we spiraled into void, I looked back at massive vessel. It looked smaller than it had 10 minutes ago. Less like Empire and more like Cage. Garrett reached out, fingers brushing mark on my wrist. Connection was still there, scarred, battered, humming with dull ache but unbreakable. "Where to now, Princess?" he asked, voice weak but filled with familiar, irritating humor. "Abyss front," I said, setting coordinates for edge of galaxy. "If we're going to save this galaxy, Garrett, we have to go to place where it's already dying." "Abyss front," he repeated, leaning back and closing eyes. "Sounds cozy. Hope they have decent coffee." I smiled, real genuine smile that didn't feel like mask. "I wouldn't count on it, human, but I can promise you one thing." "What's that?" "You won't have to face it alone." Through bridge, fear was still there. Cold, sharp presence in back of mind, but didn't feel like weight anymore. Felt like compass. We were terrified, we were traitors, and we were quite possibly two most hated beings in universe. But as we vanished into dark, I knew we were finally free. And for first time in my life, fire didn't just feel like duty. It felt like hope. Space at the abyss front didn't look like the end of the universe. It looked like the universe had already ended and someone forgot to clean up. The viewport showed me something my mind struggled to process. Space here wasn't black, it was fractured. Long, jagged streaks of violet and sickly gray light cut through the void like cracks in a shattered mirror. Stars weren't points of light, but warped, elongated smears that seemed to writhe as I watched. "Navigation is completely fried," I said, squinting at haptic display, trying to show we were simultaneously in 17 different locations. "Quantum positioning arrays can't establish stable reference frame. Gravitational constants fluctuating by 40% every 10 seconds. It's like space itself is sick." Beside me, Garrett gripped console edge hard enough his knuckles went white. Through Cortex Bridget, I felt nausea rolling through him. His human inner ear wasn't designed for environments where up and down were suggestions rather than facts. "This is the Great Rift." I continued pulling up what archival data the Dominion kept on this sector. Most marked with warnings like navigation forbidden and approach at risk of immediate termination. My people's legends call it Grave of Stars. According to old text, first Vorshai queen supposedly threw remains of ancient darkness here after precursor wars. We were told it was prison. "Looks more like open wound," Garrett managed, swallowing hard. "Open wound that's infected and getting worse." He wasn't wrong. Through viewport, I could see graveyard extending in all directions, thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands, all drifting in slow, inexorable spiral toward a point of absolute darkness at the center. Some were ancient Vorshai dreadnoughts, bone-plated hulls bleached white by cosmic radiation. Others were hegemony vessels, Terran colony ships, even spacecraft from species I didn't recognize. And they were all being pulled. "Look at telemetry," Garrett said, leaning over to study sensor data. His proximity sent pleasant warmth through bridge. "All these hulks aren't just drifting. They're being drawn toward that central mass at velocity way too high for gravitational pull we're detecting." "A summons," I finished. "Not gravity. It's a call." I closed my eyes, focusing on bridge between us. At first only familiar comfort of Garrett's presence, his determination, fear worn like armor, fundamental humanness. But beneath that, underneath static of shared consciousness, I felt it. A pulse. Rhythmic, ancient. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Felt like heartbeat made of cold stone and empty air. Not quite sound, not quite sensation, but something bypassing senses entirely and speaking directly to quantum substrate of reality itself. A command to return to nothingness growing stronger with each pulse. Void eaters, I whispered. They're not invading our space, they're being called home. And they're dragging everything they've touched with them. Garrett pulled up tactical overlay. There, he said, pointing to Graveyard Center. At heart sat structure, making my thermal core stutter with instinctive rejection. Massive obsidian spire easily 100 kilometers long, shaped like jagged needle thrust into space's fabric. Didn't reflect light, consumed it, drinking photons like dying man gulping water. Pulses of white-hot energy rippled along surface, each surge flowing toward tip, where swirling vortex of shadow matter actively tore hole in reality. Origin pylon. I said words from encrypted Dominion files suddenly making terrible sense. Precursors built this, not as weapon as reset button. If galaxy became too chaotic, if power balance shifted too far from original species, pylon would activate to cleanse sector and start anew. Galaxy-sized delete button, Garrett said, voice flat with calm that came right before screaming. Your father isn't fighting void eaters. He's trying to use them. Purge everyone he considers weak. Let Vorshai inherit whatever's left. Through bridge, I felt his cold fury. He'd rather rule graveyard than share universe, I said bitterly. Cinderrunner shuddered as we drifted closer to Pylon's gravity well. Alarms cascaded across console warning of structural integrity, failures, power fluctuations, imminent thermal collapse. We need plan, Garrett said, pulling up ship's limited armament. We've got maybe 6 pulse charges, half-depleted thermal lance, and whatever's left in your Glaive's power cell. Not exactly a salt force loadout. I studied Pylon's structure mind, racing through scenarios. Spire was protected by multi-phase shield flickering through 17 frequencies, each designed to deflect different attack types. We couldn't shoot our way through, but precursor technology had weakness. Built everything around biometric authentication, genetic locks, and bloodline verification. And I was Vorshai royalty, eldest daughter of Grand Warlord. Mark on my wrist, I said slowly, touching glowing brand, tying me to Garrett. It's not just bond symbol. It's integrated with my genetic code thermal signature neural pattern. Precursors use similar technology for command systems. Garrett's eyes widened. You think you can override Pylon? Use royal DNA to access primary systems. Not just access, I corrected. I think I can become the access. Pylon needs biometric key to initiate shutdown protocols. My father knew this. He's been planning this for years, raised daughter Mark her as heir, and when time came, realization hit like thermal lance to chest. He was going to sacrifice me, I whispered. Not as punishment, as fuel. Pylon needs Royal Vorshai DNA and massive energy discharge to complete reset sequence. Wasn't trying to kill me out of rage. Was preparing me. Exile neural inhibitor bringing me to Obsidian Throne, all designed to put me in right emotional state to willingly sacrifice myself for what I thought was greater good. Through bridge, Garrett's horror matched mine, but beneath it was something else, core of absolute unyielding refusal. Then we don't give him what he wants, Garrett said firmly. We find another way to shut down Pylon. One that doesn't involve you dying to satisfy your father's genocidal delusions. There might not be another way, I said, pulling up architectural scans. Primary emitter is at Spire's center, sphere of pure obsidian suspended in plasma cage. To overload it, someone needs to make physical contact and channel enough energy through system to shatter resonance field. How much energy? I ran calculations, each number making my core temperature drop. Enough to vaporize standard Vorshai in 0.3 seconds. I said, for human, it would be effectively instantaneous. What if we do it together, Garrett asked. Through bridge, pool our neural energy share load. I wanted to tell him impossible, that human and Vorshai biology were too different, that bridge was never designed for that kind of power transfer. That attempting it would likely kill us both faster than doing it separately. But I'd already died twice in the last 48 hours, once to Void Herald, once to my father's neural inhibitor. Both times, Garrett pulled me back by simply refusing to accept universe got to tell him no. If we do this, I said carefully, survival probability is negligible. Even if energy transfer doesn't kill us outright, feedback loop could fragment our neural patterns. We might survive physically, but lose everything, making us, us. Garrett was quiet, blue eyes studying my face with intensity, making something in my chest ache. Kalen, he finally said, I spent 10 years carrying piece of your broken blade. 10 years wondering if woman who'd saved my life had survived her father's punishment. 10 years afraid to hope that somewhere in this brutal galaxy there was still someone who thought mercy mattered more than conquest. He reached out, hand finding mine warm fingers, interlacing with my heat-conducting ones. I didn't survive Ember Canyon just to watch Galaxy burn, he continued, and I definitely didn't bond to bravest person I've ever met just to tell her, sorry, math says we can't win. Negligible is better than zero. Honestly, I'll take those odds if it means I get to spend my last moments proving your father wrong about everything. Through Bridge, his conviction flooded into me, not reckless bravado, but genuine peace with choice. Terrified, yes. Absolutely horrified at death's prospect. But more afraid of living in universe where people like my father got to decide who deserved to exist. I thought about 52,000 people on Creo 7 alive because we'd refused to accept hegemony's purge doctrine. I thought about 35 Marines I'd saved at Ember Canyon, ones my father wanted me to execute. I thought about every person in every colony across 12 sectors who would wake tomorrow if we succeeded and who would be consumed by void eaters if we failed. Negligible odds, I repeated, letting numbers settle. Then I smiled, real genuine expression feeling foreign on face that spent 12 years wearing shame-like mask. I've beaten worse. Let's go rewrite some precursor engineering specs. The approach to Pylon felt like descending into something predating concept of Mao's. Debris field grew denser, forcing me to pilot through increasingly narrow gaps between dead ships. Several times, Cinder Runner scraped against hulls crumbling at touch. Ancient metal turning to dust after centuries of exposure to Rift's physics warping effects. Docking bay detected, Garrett called out. Port side of main spire about 2/3 up. I brought ship around fighting gravitational eddies trying to pull us off course. Pylon's surface was covered in symbols predating modern Vorshai script by millennia geometric patterns seeming to shift whenever I looked directly. Landing was controlled chaos. We hit docking platform hard enough to deploy emergency struts and crack 3 hull plates, but we were down. Airlock hissed open. Pylon's atmosphere rushed in. Didn't smell like anything, literally nothing. No ozone, no dust, no hint of chemical signatures even deep space carried. Air filtered through absolute zero and come out devoid of anything resembling life. I grabbed thermal glaive checking power cell. 70% charge enough for maybe 20 minutes sustained combat if I was conservative. Garrett loaded pulse carbine with practiced efficiency, then pulled out something I didn't recognize, small blocky device covered in Terran military markings. Experimental EMP mine, he explained, courtesy of Colonel Brigham's unauthorized equipment locker. If things go completely sideways, this might buy us few seconds to improvise. Improvise what? I asked. That's the improvise part, he said with grin, becoming dangerously familiar. We stepped into Pylon's interior, and reality took left turn into nightmare territory. Walls were made of something looking like frozen smoke, simultaneously solid and translucent. Floor was transparent, revealing core of swirling shadow matter, stretching down into infinity. Architecture was wrong in ways making my spatial reasoning centers scream corridors that should have been parallel intersected at impossible angles. Stairways led both up and down simultaneously. Don't look directly at geometry, I warned as Garrett stumbled. Precursor construction uses non-Euclidean mathematics. Your brain will try to rationalize and fail. Just follow my thermal signature and trust kinesthetic sense. We moved deeper, following pulsing energy signatures leading toward primary emitter. Pylon was trying to break us, sending waves of psychic static manifesting as hallucinations drawn from deepest fears. I saw my father's face twisted in contempt, telling me I was worthless. Saw sisters laughing at Scar, calling me broken blade, who'd never be whole. Saw Ember Canyon, except this time I hadn't broken blade. This time I'd followed orders, and faces of 35 dead Marines stared with accusing eyes. Lies, Garrett's voice cut through visions, hand-finding mine in darkness. Void has no voice, only echoes your doubts. Through bridge, I felt him fighting own hallucinations, dead squad mates, cataloged failures. Fear he was fundamentally broken, and everyone depending on him would die because of weakness. They're not real, I said, pulling him forward. Stay with me, Garrett. Focus on what we know is true. What do we know is true, he asked, voice strained. We know mercy is stronger than conquest. I said, using glaive to cut through barrier of crystallized void matter. We know 52,000 people are alive because we refuse to accept someone else's definition of acceptable losses. We know this scar my father gave me, the one meant to mark failure, led me to you. And I know I'd rather die fighting beside you than live 1,000 years in my father's empire. Hallucinations didn't disappear, but lost some power. We pushed forward, climbing higher into spire. We reached primary emitter chamber after what felt like hours, but was probably 40 minutes. Room was perfect sphere, easily 300 meters diameter. At center, suspended in cage of white-hot plasma crackling with barely contained energy, floated obsidian sphere. Beautiful and way-collapsing star, was beautiful, terrible, absolute, utterly beyond human comprehension. Surface perfectly smooth drinking light, so completely it seemed to create hole in space itself. That's it, I breathed. Core of pylon, reset mechanism. Around sphere void eaters swirled like sharks circling prey, hundreds ranging from small, skittering masses to enormous heralds towering 4 meters tall. They weren't attacking, they were waiting. They know, Garrett said, raising carbine. Somehow they know we're here to shut down their beacon. They're not here to stop us, I realized, studying formation. They're here to feed on whatever energy we release. If we overload sphere discharge, we'll be massive. These creatures are positioning to consume it. So we'll be fighting on two fronts, Garrett said grimly. Overload sphere while keeping void swarm off our backs. Fantastic. I looked at plasma cage at impossible energies required to reach sphere. At void eaters that would swarm moment we made our move. At man beside me who'd somehow convinced me negligible odds were worth taking. On 3, I asked, echoing question he'd asked lifetime ago in Grand Hall. On 3, he confirmed. We moved as one. I charged forward, glaive igniting with white-hot thermal energy carving through void swarm like blade through shadow. Garrett covered my flank, pulse carbine spitting precise bursts, picking off smaller creatures trying to swarm us. Bridge between us hummed with perfect synchronization. I didn't need to tell him where I was going, he knew. He didn't need to warn about threats from behind. I felt them through his awareness. We were no longer two separate people fighting side by side. We were single weapon with two bodies moving through chaos with deadly grace. Void Herald materialized directly in my path, vortex face swirling with stolen light. I didn't hesitate. Triggered full thermal release on glaive and drove it straight into creature's core. Impact sent shockwave through chamber, shattering 3 of plasma cage's support struts. Herald shrieked soundless psychic wail, feeling like reality itself screaming, and exploded into cloud of gray ash. Cage is destabilizing, Garrett shouted, planting EMP mine at another support strut's base. We've got maybe 2 minutes before whole containment field collapses. Then we'd better work fast, I said, reaching Cage's edge. Heat was intense even for Vorshai, easily 900 degrees hot enough to liquefy most metals. I reached through crackling energy field armor, smoking as it made contact with plasma, and pressed hand against obsidian sphere. Universe stopped. I wasn't in pylon anymore. Wasn't even in my body. Was consciousness without formed thought, without substance awareness, floating in infinite void predating space and time. And I wasn't alone. You are Vorshai presence observed. Not voices required air and sound waves. This was pure concept meaning without medium. Royal blood, the key we have waited for. Who are you, I thought back. We are origin. We are precursors who built this galaxy when void was young. We are ones who looked at entropy and said, not yet. Images flooded my consciousness. Ancient beings, neither Vorshai, nor human, nor any species I recognize building pylon as failsafe. Way to reset galactic civilization if it became too corrupted, too chaotic, too lost in darkness. But reset was never meant to be used, I realize. It was supposed to be deterrent, threat keeping species in line. Correct. But your father has activated sequence. In 72 hours, Pylon will complete cycle. Every world touched by void contamination will be purged. 97% of current galactic civilization will cease to exist. How do I stop it? You cannot. Sequence is irreversible once initiated, but you can transform it. Pylon offers choice, purge to restore balance, or accept chaos and evolve. What does that mean? It means you must decide what galaxy becomes. Order through extinction or growth through adaptation. Your father chose purge. You must choose evolution. Second presence joined us in void. Familiar warm, determined as winter ice refusing to melt. Garrett. I thought relief flooding through me. Hey, princess, his consciousness replied. Fancy meeting you in psychic breakdown of reality. You weren't going to make biggest decision in galactic history without me, were you? How are you here, I asked. Humans shouldn't be able to interface with precursor technology. I touched Sphere right after you, he said. Figured if you were going to die, might as well join you. Also, Bridge. I think when we bonded, you kind of upgraded my neural architecture. I can see things I shouldn't see, feel patterns in quantum substrate. It's extremely weird and mildly terrifying. Precursor presence regarded Garrett with what might have been curiosity by if ancient cosmic entities were capable of such mundane emotions. A human, bonded to Vorshai royalty. This is unexpected. Yeah, we get that a lot, Garrett replied. So what's this choice Kalen has to make? Void around us shifted, and suddenly we were seeing galaxies spread out like map made of light. Trillions of lives, thousands of species, countless worlds all connected in web of cause and effect so complex it made my perception centers ache. Pylon was designed with fundamental flaw, Precursor explained. It assumes chaos is enemy. That entropy must be fought with absolute order. But life is not order. Life is universe learning to dance with entropy instead of drowning in it. My father wants order, I said bitterly. He wants galaxy where Vorshai rule through fear and weak are purged. That's not life. That's stagnation dressed as strength. Then choose differently, Precursor said. Touch core. Channel your combined essence, Vorshai fire and human adaptability, thermal certainty, and emotional chaos. Feed Pylon, not purge command but evolution protocol. Transform weapon into bridge. What happens if we succeed? Garrett asked. We'll cease assault. They will return to their dimension and barrier between entropy and creation will stabilize. Galaxy will have space to grow to change, to become something neither we precursors nor your father's dominion could control. And if we fail, I asked, you will be unmade, not killed, erased. Every version of you across every quantum possibility will cease to have ever existed. Universe will rewrite itself as if Princess Kalen and Captain Garrett Hawthorne were never born. Silence, or void equivalent of silence. Through bridge, I felt Garrett's fear. Genuine visceral terror at prospect of complete erasure. But beneath it was something I was learning to recognize as his defining characteristic, absolute refusal to let fear make decisions. Kalen, he thought I told you before, saying, I didn't survive Ember Canyon just to watch galaxy burn. Honestly, I'd rather not exist at all than exist in universe, where your father gets to decide who lives and dies. The odds are terrible, I pointed out. Negligible, remember. We've never beaten worse than complete quantum erasure, but it's about time we leveled up. Despite terror, despite certainty of death, I felt something warm and fierce bloom in chest. This man, this fragile mortal, infuriating human, had looked at impossible situation and decided impossible was just suggestion. Let's do it, I decided. Let's teach universe that evolution beats extinction. Together, Garrett added. Always, I confirmed. Precursor presence seemed to pulse with what might have been approval. Then touch core, become bridge, and show galaxy what happens when fire learns to dance with ice. Reality snapped back like rubber band. I was back in body hand pressed against obsidian, Sphere Garrett's hand covering mine. Around us, void eaters were swarming, sensing something fundamental was about to change. Now, I shouted. We pushed, not with hands, not with physical strength. We pushed with everything we were, every memory, every choice, every moment of fear and courage and determination. I poured thermal energy into sphere fire that burned in my bloodline for 800 generations. Garrett channeled human adaptability, desperate resourcefulness of species that crawled from caves and somehow convinced themselves they could touch stars. Sphere cracked. Not physically, conceptually. Perfect, absolute order of precursor engineering met beautiful chaos of human Vorshai cooperation and contradiction, created cascade failure in Pylon's fundamental operating system. Plasma cage exploded. Energy, pure undifferentiated power erupted from sphere in wave that should have vaporized us instantly. But bridge held. Garrett and I weren't separate anymore. We were single entity with two bodies sharing load distributing damage across both neural patterns. His bioelectric current stabilized my thermal runaway. My heat signature kept his human cells from freezing under Void's influence. Together we created something neither species had ever achieved, a lone hybrid consciousness existing in space between order and chaos. Void Eaters shrieked chorus of soundless wails resonating across dimensions. They weren't attacking anymore. They were retreating. Beacon calling them was changing frequency, transforming from summons into dismissal. Pylon shuddered. Throughout impossible architecture, cracks of white light began spreading, transforming obsidian nightmare into something resembling stained glass more than weapon. Vortex at Spire's tip didn't explode. It stabilized, becoming clean gateway instead of ragged wound in reality. And through that gateway Void Eaters poured. Not in chaos, not in hunger, but in orderly procession of creatures returning home after long and terrible war. Last one to pass through was Harold, same one I'd fought on Creo 7, or maybe another looking identical. It paused at threshold, Vortex face turning to regard us. For a moment, I felt something from it that wasn't hunger or malice. Gratitude. Then it was gone and gateway sealed. Energy discharge from transformation should have killed us. Should have turned atoms into plasma and scattered them across 3 dimensions. But somehow impossibly we were still breathing. I looked down at our hands still pressed against sphere. Marks on our wrists were glowing with intensity, hurting to look at directly. White light threaded with veins of blue and orange Vorshai thermal energy and human bioelectric current, and something else entirely, something neither and both. Did we? Garrett started to ask. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. Garrett, I caught him before he hit ground, cradling his head. Through bridge, I felt consciousness flickering like candle in hurricane. Energy discharge had been too much for human nervous system. He was dying. No, I thought fiercely. No, no, no. We didn't come this far for you to die now. I did what he'd done for me twice already. Opened bridge, completely holding nothing back, and poured every spark of thermal energy I possessed into his failing systems. I felt heartbeats, stuttering neurons misfiring, body beginning cascade shutdown that would end in death, and I refused to accept it. Live, I whispered, pressing forehead against his. Garrett Hawthorne, you impossible brilliant human. You told me only thing that makes sense in this galaxy is being together. So don't you dare leave me alone now. Live. Through bridge, I shoved memory of every moment we'd shared. Grand Hall when he'd looked past scar and seen courage. Cortex sync when we'd touched minds and recognized kindred spirits. Creo 7 when we'd saved 52,000 lives because neither could accept those people deserved to die. Neural inhibitor when we'd overloaded Dominion weapon through sheer mutual determination. We are bridge, I said, words resonating with power from somewhere beyond understanding. We are choice. We are fire and ice order and chaos, Vorshai and human. And we don't break. Garrett's heart stuttered, stopped, restarted. His eyes opened. He croaked, did that sound like choir to you? Because I definitely heard singing. Relief so intense it felt like pain flooded through me. I laughed, sound half sob, and pulled him into embrace, probably cracking at least 2 ribs. You're alive, I said. You died and I brought you back, and now we're even. Pretty sure you're still ahead on save count, he managed, arms wrapping around me, despite obvious pain. But I'll take it. We sat there on floor of transformed pylon, holding each other, while universe rearranged itself around us. Through transparent floor, I could see shadow matter core transforming infinite darkness, becoming something that looked almost like starlight. Transmission crackled through our comms first signal, able to penetrate Rift's interference in centuries. Unidentified energy signature, familiar voice said. Colonel Brigham, this is USS Vanguard. If anyone's alive in there now, would be great time to broadcast status. Garrett reached for comm unit with shaking hands. Vanguard, this is Captain Hawthorne. Status is, complicated. But we're breathing and Galaxy is an ending. So I'm calling that win. Pause lasted several heartbeats. Captain, Brigham finally said, voice carrying emotion I couldn't quite identify. You beautiful, reckless, absolutely insane son of a bitch. How the hell did you survive Abyss Front? Turns out, when you're bonded to Vorshai Princess, you get access to some impressive medical benefits, Garrett replied. Also, we might have accidentally transformed precursor superweapon into stable dimensional gateway. Details to follow. Another pause. Hegemony fleet's pulling back, Brigham said. Whatever you did, it shut down Void Eater swarms across 12 sectors. Convergence Council is in complete chaos. And there's Vorshai flagship broadcasting on all channels demanding to know. Transmission cut out, replaced by signal so powerful it made equipment crackle. My father's voice filled chamber. Kalen. Not question, not even greeting. Just my name spoken in tone I'd never heard from him before. Wasn't rage. Wasn't contempt. Was something I couldn't quite process. Father, I replied, pulling away from Garrett enough to activate visual comm. Hologram flickered to life, showing grand audience chamber of Obsidian Throne. But something was different. 12 high reavers who normally stood in alcoves like statues carved from malice were leaving, walking out, abandoning posts for first time in living memory, and my father sat on throne looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. You transformed Pylon, he said. Wasn't question. I chose evolution over extinction, I replied. I chose growth over stagnation. I chose to trust that Galaxy has room for more than just Vorshai dominance. Thrax was silent for a long moment, glowing eyes studying me through holographic link. I waited for rage, condemnation, declaration. I was even greater failure than he'd thought. Instead, he said something I never expected. Council has fallen. Splinter clans are declaring independence. Hegemony is fragmenting. Convergence as we knew it is dead. He stood, massive armor clanking. For first time in 800 years, he removed helmet. Beneath was face I'd never seen, ancient, scarred, carrying weight of millennia. You were right, he said, and each word sounded torn from chest. Fire I was trying to protect had already moved on. I built empire on fear and called it strength. I carved scars into own daughter and called it discipline. I activated weapon that would have killed billions and called it necessity. He reached up and with motion, looking like it cost him centuries, removed Warlord's seal from armor, golden emblem marking his authority for 800 years. I am stepping down as Grand Warlord, he said, holding seal in palm like it weighed nothing. Obsidian Throne will be dissolved. And this, he closed fist and seal crumbled to ash. This dies with old empire. Through hologram, I saw shock ripple through remaining high reavers. Destroying seal was irreversible. Final. Vorshai Warlord had never willingly unmade themselves. You're serious, I breathed. I have been many things, Kalen, Thrax replied, but I have never been liar. He looked at me one last time. You saved Galaxy, not by being weapon I tried to forge you into, but by being person I tried to destroy. I am proud, even if I have no right to be. Hologram started to fade. Father, I called out, voice cracking. He paused. The scar, I said, touching face. I used to think it was your final judgment on me, but it became thing that led me to Garrett. It became symbol showing me mercy and strength aren't opposites. They're same things seen from different angles. So, thank you for making me who I needed to become, even if you didn't mean to. Thrax's expression was unreadable. Then slowly he pressed fist to chest, Vorshai gesture of deepest respect reserved for warriors who'd proven themselves in impossible battles. May your fire burn eternal, daughter of evolution, he said. Then he was gone. 1 year later. Unity Spire on Creo 7 gleamed in light of System's twin suns, testament to what could be built when species stopped fighting and started cooperating. Structure was beautiful hybrid of Terran modular steel and Vorshai thermal conducting obsidian rising from rebuilt colony like beacon. I stood on observation balcony watching plaza below. Human children were playing tag with Vorshai hatchlings' laughter, a sound that would have been impossible just 12 months ago. In Market District, mixed crews of engineers were installing new gateway network, precursor technology we'd adapted from transformed pylon and allowing stable transit without void contamination. Garrett stepped up beside me, wrapping arm around waist. He'd filled out in past year, no longer exhausted Marine who'd barely survived abyss. Now he wore blue and gold uniform of Sovereign Union Diplomatic Corps with easy confidence. "Ready for big speech?" he asked. I looked down at dress formal Vorshai ceremonial robes modified to incorporate Terran aesthetics. Scar on my face was fully visible, highlighted, rather than hidden. It had become my signature symbol appearing on Sovereign Union's flag. "I've been preparing for this my entire life," I said. "Just didn't know it." In Grand Assembly Hall, representatives from 47 different species waited. Terran coalition, splinter clans, reformed hegemony, even few delegations from species that had been on verge of extinction under old convergence protocols, now given space to rebuild. I walked to podium feeling weight of thousands of eyes. Through bridge, I felt Garrett's steady presence giving strength. 29 years ago, I began voice carrying through hall's acoustics. I was born in Vorshai Dominion. I was raised to believe strength meant dominance, that mercy was weakness. That only way to survive in hostile universe was to make sure everyone else feared you more than they feared dark. I touched Scar. At 16, I was given choice: execute 35 human Marines or refuse my father's orders. I chose mercy, and my father marked me with this scar to show entire Dominion what happened to warriors too weak to do what needed to be done. I paused, looking out at assembly. For 12 years, I carried this scar as badge of shame. I believed I was broken, failed, unworthy of fire burning in my bloodline. My eyes found Garrett in crowd standing with Colonel Brigham and other Terran officers. Then human veteran looked at my scar and saw courage. He saw refusing to execute helpless prisoners wasn't weakness. It was bravest thing I could have done. And because he saw that because he valued mercy over conquest, we were able to stand together at Abyss Front and choose evolution over extinction. I held up document representing year of negotiation compromise, careful diplomatic work. Today we ratify Unity Accord. This document dissolves old purge protocols across all signatory systems. It establishes sovereign union as coalition of equals, where no species has authority to decide another species' right to exist. It creates future where strength means cooperation, where survival means adaptation, and where mercy is recognized as civilization's foundation. I looked directly at Vorshai delegation, at warriors who'd once served under my father's banner and now served something greater. "We are not signing this because we've stopped being afraid of each other," I said. "We're signing it because we've decided being together is worth fear. That building something new is worth risk of losing what we had. That bridge between us, painful and difficult, as it is to build, is stronger than any wall we could construct." Silence in hall was absolute. Then from back, Colonel Brigham started clapping. Slow, deliberate sound echoing off vaulted ceiling. Garrett joined him, then Vorshai Splinter Clan representatives, then reformed hegemony delegates. Within seconds, entire assembly was on feet, applause thundering through space like physical force. I signed my name at bottom of accord. Signature was bold, clear, absolutely final. 47 other representatives lined up to add theirs. That evening, Garrett and I found ourselves back on private balcony, watching twin suns set over rebuilt colony. Sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, and city below was galaxy of lights, each one representing life that hadn't been glassed, family that hadn't been purged, dream that hadn't been extinguished. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, pulling me close. I touched Mark on wrist, feeling it pulse with warmth, white light threaded through veins of blue and orange. Vorshai and human fire and ice strength and adaptation merged into something neither species had achieved alone. "I'm thinking about person I was in Grand Hall," I said, standing at end of line expecting nothing, deserving nothing. She wouldn't believe she'd end up here building new galaxy with someone who refused to let her hate herself. Garrett was quiet, arms warm around me. "That person wasn't broken at all," he finally said. "She was just waiting for someone to see her clearly. And I think Galaxy is damn lucky I was smart enough, or maybe just terrified enough to look past perfect princesses and choose woman whose scar proved she'd already won only war that mattered. I turned in his arms, studying his face in fading light. Scars he'd earned at Ember Canyon lines that year of diplomatic stress had added around eyes' determined set of jaw, still hadn't learned when to back down. I love you, I said. Words in Vorshai carried more weight than Terran equivalent. They were formal declaration binding contract promise, lasting beyond death. For seeing courage where my father saw cowardice. For sharing a load when Void tried to unmake us. For being just as terrified as I am and showing up anyway. Garrett's smile was soft, genuine, carrying none of reckless bravado that usually masked fear. I love you too, he said, for teaching me strength and mercy aren't opposites. For showing me, bravest thing you can do is choose kindness when universe screams for blood. For being bridge I didn't know I needed until I saw you wearing your scar-like crown. Twin suns dipped below horizon. Stars emerged one by one and somewhere in space's depths transformed. Pylon hummed with quiet purpose, gateway now not weapon. Void Eaters had gone home. Galaxy was healing. I traced Scar in fading light, seeing not shame, but map of every choice that led here. Fire is still burning, I whispered. But it's not weapon anymore, Garrett said. No. I watched first stars appear. Its beacon, lighting way home for everyone still lost in dark. Mark on our wrists pulsed Vorshai and human fire and ice, two incompatible species who'd convinced universe that compatibility was overrated. Bridge was eternal. And for first time in 28 years, I wasn't afraid of what came next.